Imagine that we have just planted a small young tree in your garden. Since it is newly planted, it cannot survive on its own and needs a continuous supply of water to grow properly. Now, to make sure the tree receives water regularly, we set up a simple water supply system for it. First, there is groundwater deep beneath the earth, which serves as the source of water. However, this water cannot reach the tree by itself. Therefore, a water pump is installed to draw the groundwater upward. The pump continuously lifts the water from underground and pushes it into a large water tank that is placed on the rooftop. Next, from this water tank, a network of pipes extends downward and travels all the way to the garden where the young tree is planted. Through these pipes, water flows steadily from the tank to the roots of the plant. Thus, the entire system works together as a chain. Groundwater acts as the source, the pump moves the water, the tank stores it, and the pipes deliver it to the plant. Now, let us see how different problems in this water supply system can reduce the amount of water reaching the tree. First, suppose the groundwater level falls while the pump, electricity supply, water tank, and pipes are all functioning normally. In this case, the pump has less water available to draw, and consequently, the tree receives less water. Similarly, if the groundwater source is adequate but the pump is not working properly, less water will be pumped into the tank, again reducing the water supply to the tree. Furthermore, problems can also occur in the pipe system. If the pipes are abnormally wide, if they become blocked, or if they develop leaks, the flow of water to the tree will be affected. As a result, the amount of water reaching the tree decreases despite the presence of water in the system. Consequently, the tree becomes stressed, its growth slows down, and if the problem persists for a long period, it may eventually dry out and die. This is exactly what happens inside our body. Just as the young tree requires a continuous supply of water to survive and grow, every cell in our body requires a continuous supply of oxygen and nutrients to remain alive and function properly. These essential substances are delivered to the cells through the blood. Therefore, if the blood supply to a tissue or organ is reduced or interrupted for any reason, the cells begin to suffer from a lack of oxygen and nutrients. This state in which the tissues of the body do not receive an adequate supply of oxygen and nutrients to meet their metabolic demands is known as shock. In simple terms, shock is a condition of inadequate tissue perfusion, meaning that the blood flow reaching the body's cells is insufficient to support their normal function. Initially, their function becomes impaired, but if the problem persists, the cells gradually become damaged and may eventually die, much like a plant that dries out when it no longer receives enough water. In this analogy, the groundwater represents the blood available within the circulatory system. The water pump represents the heart, whose job is to keep the blood moving continuously throughout the body. The pipes represent the blood vessels that carry blood to different tissues and organs. Finally, the young tree represents the body's cells, tissues, and organs that depend on a constant supply of blood for their survival. Thus, just as a healthy tree, our cells depend on an adequate blood volume, a properly functioning heart, and healthy blood vessels to receive the oxygen and nutrients they need. Now, based on this analogy, we can begin to understand the different types of shock. Imagine that the pump is working properly, the electricity supply is normal, and the pipes are completely patent. However, the groundwater level begins to fall. As a result, the tree starts receiving an inadequate supply of water, despite the fact that every other component of the system is functioning normally. A very similar situation can occur in the human body. The heart may be working normally and the blood vessels may be intact, but the total amount of circulating blood or body fluid may decrease significantly. This can happen due to severe bleeding following trauma, excessive fluid loss from vomiting or diarrhea, dehydration, or extensive burns. Because there is less circulating fluid available, less blood reaches the tissues and consequently, less oxygen and nutrients are delivered to the cells. This type of shock, which occurs due to a loss of circulating blood or fluid volume, is known as hypovolemic shock. Now let us consider another situation. Imagine that the groundwater source is adequate, there is a continuous supply of electricity, the water tank is intact, and the pipes are completely patent. However, this time the problem lies in the pump itself. The pump has become weak and is no longer able to pump water efficiently. Consequently, the tree begins to receive less water. A very similar situation can occur in the human body. The amount of blood circulating in the body may be completely normal, and the blood vessels may also be intact. However, if the heart becomes weak and loses its ability to pump blood effectively, the tissues will receive less blood than they require. This can occur due to conditions such as myocardial ischemia, myocardial infarction, severe dysrhythmias, cardiomyopathy, or problems affecting the heart valves. As a result, less oxygen and fewer nutrients are delivered to the body's cells, leading to inadequate tissue perfusion. This type of shock, which occurs because the heart fails to pump blood effectively, is known as cardiogenic shock. Now, let us consider another situation. Imagine that the groundwater source is adequate, the pump is working properly, and the entire water delivery system appears to be functioning perfectly. However, this time, a blockage develops somewhere within the pipes. As a result, water cannot flow freely through the system, and consequently, less water reaches the tree. A very similar situation can occur in the human body. The blood volume may be normal, the heart muscle may be capable of pumping, and the blood vessels may be intact. However, a physical obstruction can interfere with the normal movement of blood through the circulatory system. Because of this obstruction, the heart is unable to fill properly with blood or pump an adequate amount of blood to the body. As a result, cardiac output decreases, tissue perfusion falls, and the cells receive less oxygen and fewer nutrients. Such an obstruction may occur when air accumulates inside the chest and compresses the heart and major blood vessels, a condition known as tension pneumothorax. Similarly, fluid can accumulate around the heart and squeeze it from the outside, preventing it from filling normally, a condition called cardiac tamponade. In addition, a large blood clot may block blood flow through the lungs, preventing blood from returning effectively to the left side of the heart. This is known as a massive pulmonary embolism. This type of shock, which occurs because blood flow is mechanically obstructed despite the presence of adequate blood volume and a functioning heart, is known as obstructive shock. Now, let us consider another situation. Everything in the water supply system appears to be normal. However, this time, a chemical is released into the water. As a result of this chemical reaction, the walls of the pipes become loosened and lose their normal firmness. Consequently, the pipes widen abnormally. Because the same amount of water is now flowing through a much larger pipe network, the pressure within the system falls, making it harder for water to reach the tree efficiently. Furthermore, the same chemical also makes the pipes leaky, allowing water to escape into the surrounding soil before reaching its destination. Consequently, the tree receives much less water than it actually needs. Similarly, in the human body, during a severe allergic reaction, certain substances, particularly histamine, are released in large amounts from mast cells and basophils. Histamine causes the blood vessels to dilate, making them much wider than normal. At the same time, the walls of the blood vessels become more permeable, allowing fluid to leak out of the circulation and accumulate in the surrounding tissues. This phenomenon is often referred to as a third space fluid shift. As a result, due to this fluid shift from the blood vessels into the surrounding tissues, the amount of fluid remaining within the circulation gradually decreases. Consequently, tissue perfusion decreases and the cells receive less oxygen and fewer nutrients. This type of shock, which occurs due to widespread vasodilation and fluid leakage triggered by a severe allergic reaction, is known as anaphylactic shock. Like in anaphylactic shock, where mast cells and basophils release histamine, a similar process occurs during a severe bacterial infection. However, in this case, certain bacteria release substances known as endotoxins, which trigger a widespread inflammatory response throughout the body. These endotoxins cause extensive vasodilation, making the blood vessels much wider than normal. In addition, they promote the opening of arteriovenous shunts, which are shortcut pathways that allow blood to bypass the capillaries where oxygen and nutrients are normally delivered to the tissues. Under normal circumstances, blood flows from arteries into capillaries, where oxygen and nutrients are delivered to the cells. In return, carbon dioxide and metabolic waste products are collected from the tissues. This blood then enters the veins and is carried away for further processing and elimination of waste. However, when AV shunts open, a significant portion of the blood bypasses the capillary beds altogether and flows directly from the arteries into the veins. Consequently, oxygen and nutrients are not delivered effectively to the tissues, while waste removal is also impaired. As a result, even though blood may still be circulating through the body, many cells receive an inadequate supply of oxygen and nutrients. Consequently, cellular hypoxia develops, tissue perfusion decreases, and organ function begins to deteriorate. This type of shock, which occurs due to a severe infection causing widespread vasodilation and the opening of AV shunts, is known as septic shock. Lastly, under normal circumstances, the sympathetic nervous system continuously sends signals to the smooth muscles present in the walls of blood vessels, helping them maintain an appropriate degree of constriction and vascular tone. However, when these sympathetic signals are suddenly lost, particularly in injuries above the T6 level, the blood vessels below the level of injury lose their normal tone and become widely dilated. Normally, blood vessels constrict to help push blood back toward the heart. However, when they can no longer constrict properly, less blood returns to the heart. Consequently, the heart receives less blood to pump to the rest of the body, resulting in reduced tissue perfusion. This type of shock, which occurs due to a sudden loss of sympathetic nervous system activity, leading to widespread vasodilation, is known as neurogenic shock. Now that we understand what shock is, an important question arises. What factors are required to maintain adequate tissue perfusion under normal circumstances? To answer this, let us once again return to our water supply analogy. For the tree to receive a continuous and adequate supply of water, three major components must function properly. First, there must be an adequate water source. Similarly, our body must have an adequate amount of circulating blood. This blood not only fills the blood vessels, but also carries oxygen and nutrients to the tissues and removes waste products from them. Second, the pump itself must function properly. Likewise, in the human body, the heart acts as the pump. It must generate enough force to keep blood moving continuously throughout the circulatory system and deliver oxygen and nutrients to every tissue according to the body's needs. If the heart becomes weak and cannot pump effectively, tissue perfusion begins to fall. Finally, the pipe network must remain intact and function properly. In the same way, our blood vessels must remain healthy and maintain an appropriate diameter. They should be able to constrict or dilate when necessary to regulate blood flow and maintain adequate blood pressure. If the blood vessels become excessively dilated, obstructed, or leaky, the circulation can no longer deliver blood efficiently to the tissues. Now, although an adequate blood volume, a properly functioning heart, and healthy blood vessels are all essential for tissue perfusion, there is one more important factor that determines whether blood can actually reach the tissues effectively. That factor is blood pressure. Blood pressure is expressed as systolic blood pressure over diastolic blood pressure. However, when it comes to tissue perfusion, neither systolic nor diastolic pressure alone tells the complete story. What really matters is the mean arterial pressure, or MAP, represents the average blood pressure in the arteries during one heartbeat. You can think of MAP as the force that pushes blood through the blood vessels and ultimately delivers oxygen and nutrients to the cells. In fact, it is this pressure that drives blood through the arterioles, capillaries, and veins before returning it back to the heart. Therefore, if the MAP falls too low, blood can no longer circulate efficiently through the tissues. As a result, tissue perfusion decreases. Cells receive less oxygen and nutrients, and if the problem persists, cellular dysfunction and cell death may occur. Under normal circumstances, the MAP ranges between approximately 70 and 110 millimeters of mercury, and generally, a minimum MAP of about 65 millimeters of mercury is required to adequately perfuse vital organs such as the brain and the heart. The MAP itself depends on several factors, most importantly, cardiac output, vascular resistance, and venous return to the heart. Therefore, any condition that reduces the heart's pumping ability, decreases blood volume, causes excessive vasodilation, or produces abnormal heart rhythms can lower the MAP and compromise tissue perfusion. In addition to MAP, another useful parameter that provides insight into a patient's circulatory status is the pulse pressure, which is simply the difference between the systolic and diastolic blood pressures. Under normal circumstances, the pulse pressure is usually between 30 and 50 millimeters of mercury. Changes in pulse pressure can often provide early clues about problems affecting cardiac output and tissue perfusion. For example, a narrowed pulse pressure generally suggests that less blood is being pumped out of the heart with each heartbeat. This can occur in conditions such as significant blood loss, tension pneumothorax, or cardiac tamponade, where cardiac output is reduced despite the body's attempts to compensate through vasoconstriction. Therefore, a narrowing pulse pressure may serve as an early warning sign that tissue perfusion is beginning to decline. Now we have understood the major types of shock and the different mechanisms by which tissue perfusion can become inadequate. However, regardless of the cause, all forms of shock ultimately produce the same problem. The cells of the body begin to suffer from a lack of oxygen and nutrients. But what exactly happens inside these cells when blood flow decreases? We will explore that in the next lecture.